We have another special guest this week in Daniel Ziffer, who spent considerable time covering the recent Banking Royal Commission and has now written a book chronicling his experiences entitled A Wunch of Bankers. In today's interview, we dive into Daniel's take on the outcomes of the Royal Commission, the highlights during the event itself, and the broader effects still to come on Australia's financial institutions.
Yeah, one of the main reasons we wanted to get someone like Dan in here, and there's actually a couple of people we're looking at, a bit of a post-mortem on the Royal Commission, because what we're really keen to see is what the longer-term effects are on this, because it was made for some great theatre. There were some great stories and the shock horror and people fainting in the witness chair and all these types of very media newsworthy events. But what we're really keen to see is how that actually is going to affect investments over the longer term. Will this just fade away and be swept under the carpet, and there'll be a bunch of recommendations that were promised but never actually get around to being implemented, or do we actually see some concrete changes to profitability and to the housing market? So the three big ones we're really focused on is the longer term bank profitability and whether we've seen supercharged lending for years, but also a lot of other peripheral businesses making quite good returns, as whether we're going to see changes to that. The effects on the housing market and whether we're going to see the credit contract. We see a big credit contraction, whether we see that sort of fade away now, and then also some of the regulatory effects on other sectors that were affected by the Royal Commission. So yeah, very good to have someone of Dan's calibre to discuss these issues and more.
After the interview, we will then look at some of the wider implications that these themes can impact on how we invest money every day at Nucleus Wealth. So join Nucleus Wealth's Head of Investments, Damien Klassen, and myself as we learn more about the real impacts that banks are having on everyday Australians' lives, what looms in their future, and the future of the Australian property market. I hope you enjoy. Today on the show, we have the experienced journalist, producer and author of a new insightful and damning exposé of his experiences covering the recent Banking Royal Commission entitled A Wunch of Bankers. Dan Ziffer, welcome to Nucleus Investment Insights.
Lovely to be here.
Now, I might just start with a question that I've posed to a few of our recent guests on a similar topic. But first, some background. So after 18 months of debating in Parliament as to whether or not we should even have a Royal Commission, we've now had public hearings over 69 days, over 130 witnesses and 10,000 public submissions provided. We've had a number of banking elite heads that have since rolled, and we've seen hospitalisations both physically and also career-wise. And now, of course, we have a 1,000-page report telling us, in essence, that it's the fault of the regulators and the mortgage brokers. Given your experience covering news for many years in the Australian financial services industry, is this the Royal Commission that you could have hoped for?
The thing with Royal Commissions, and it doesn't matter what field they're held in, is you just never know what you're going to get. The most recent one before this was the Trade Union Royal Commission, which was set up, and most people thought it had a particular aim to kind of, get at one side of politics. And the people, one politician in particular, Bill Shorten, who was then opposition leader and seeking to be Prime Minister. And it had a very different impact. It caused the resignation of the New South Wales Liberal Premier. It kind of swayed across all these parts of Australian life. So when you hold an open inquiry that has the extraordinary powers that Royal Commissions have, you might seek a certain outcome, you might think you know what's going to happen, but they are extremely unpredictable events.
Okay, sure. And I guess on that similar vein, you sort of kick off your book with what's known as, what you've been titled, the shit list. So it was an opportunity of, I think it was 50 pages offered to every major institution to detail out all their transgressions over the last sort of decade or so. Do you mind just sort of maybe running through some of the more egregious participants and outcomes in that list?
Yeah, sure. So what would happen in each of the 7 hearings that the Royal Commission held into different topics was that they would give the participants, the companies they were seeking to question, essentially 50 pages of paper and say, fill this with everything that's happened in the last 10 years. Now, a lot of it was known. It was adverse findings from regulators, it was court cases, it was scandals that had hit the media and been remediated. A lot of it was unknown. And what they really wanted to was not just a list of everything that had gone wrong, but to try and get a sense of how. How is it that these things had occurred? I mean, so many of these across all the institutions are in many ways what led to the Royal Commission. It was a lot of reporting on the ABC and Fairfax in particular about the Commonwealth Bank and scandals in financial planning and insurance that really propelled the Royal Commission into being. But when you saw these lists, they're on such a wide-ranging and in many ways deeply cultural series of problems. The National Australia Bank had problems with the false witnessing of beneficiary forms, which sounds really boring, and it is, but it's also really important because it can invalidate the entire estate of the person that you're trying to take care of. So, what we saw here were culturalism across the banks. Probably most notably, the one that we're still talking about is fee for no service, where as the industry had gone through the future of financial advice reforms, and essentially commissions had been phased out and killed off, in an attempt to keep them, they'd made fees that did essentially the same thing. But the problem is that when you charge a fee for service, you have to provide a service. And if you don't, you know that you won't, that's not legal. That's a breach of law. And at the moment, the four big banks are in the process of paying back or spending and paying back about $10 billion to their customers for that very reason.
And all seems to start from as I said in your book, we think we've got $1 million problem or a $5 million problem, and maybe a little bit more than that.
Yeah. Well, ASIC's first swing at fee for no service put the whole thing at about 120 from memory, of which the bulk of that was the Commonwealth Bank. Now each of them, barely a week goes by. Most recently we had NAB and ANZ both saying, it's actually going to be about another $600 million. And look, a lot of that is compensation, but the majority of it is fixing systems so it doesn't happen again. And where the issue arose is for a lot of these reforms from the future of financial advice, they were to benefit consumers, and the banks were trying to desperately work out ways to circumvent them. And they did for a while. But was it a good idea? Probably not.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm sort of almost jumping forward a little bit to some of my thoughts on the investment side, but the I guess the financial planning side of it is it seems to me that we got it relatively right, or the Commission got it relatively right in terms of saying, look, most of the laws were already there. It was just a matter of actually enforcing them. And so the question now is will we go and try and add a few more band-aids to stick on the problem and say, maybe we need to get financial planners to do more studying, and maybe we need to get financial planners to jump over this hurdle and that hurdle as well. When in the end, the problem was the regulators weren't prepared to enforce it. And I guess the big question going forward is, do you honestly think they are going to be prepared to enforce it, or is it going to be more of the case of, we'll pull out a few high-profile names every now and again, but we're actually going to let most of it slide through?
I don't know if it was they weren't prepared to enforce it. The system was really against them. So they lacked money, they lacked power, they lacked staff, they lacked an ability to be across all these large and small institutions.
And they lost a number of quite high-profile cases.
And you start to lose a couple of very expensive court cases, and all of a sudden, enforceable undertakings against people who confess problems start to look like a really good solution for a cash-strapped organisation. And beyond that, I've talked to the regulators where you can go to court. That's great, right? So let's say you win, you get the person on a particular breach. That's fine. Then you've got to take another action to get them to pay the money back to the people they've dudded. So I can certainly see, for all the criticism, of why enforceable undertakings became the dominant way of essentially negotiating settlement, where a company would say, look, I'm not saying I did something wrong, but I'm certainly agreeing we're never going to do that again, and also I'm going to give the money back.
But it's $200 million
to fix it. So I mean, the problem is, you need to take occasional court action and win to show people that you are serious.
Yeah.
And you only have to look at APRA, who took no court action in the field of superannuation in 10 years, to show a regulator that inspired no fear and probably very little respect in the industry it operated in.
Yeah, so for me, Yeah, the big issue for a lot of this stuff for me is you look at the some of the huge fines and the millions of dollars that have been paid out and all that type of stuff, and in the end, you're basically saying to some of these bankers, so you're a banker at one of these organisations, you're getting paid a couple of $1 million, and you stand to make another couple of $1 million, and as you're reading through your book and you're talking about these guys saying, oh no, you know what, we better take away 10% of that guy's bonus this year, or 20% of that person's bonus this year, and you're like, just a minute, the guy got $1 million. And what you're saying is, rather than giving him another $1 million, we're going to give him another $800,000 because he just breached all these rules, and the company needed to pay back, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of fines. It seems like a bit of a no-lose situation to me for the guys involved. It's like saying, well, if I get caught, I lose $200,000 out of my bonus, and if I don't get caught, well, I get my full bonus, and if I get caught, maybe I get fired and I need to go find another job or
probably
parachute.
One of the most amazing days at the Royal Commission was when we delved into the 2016 annual report and annual general meeting and pay packets of Commonwealth Bank. So this was when serious scandals were exploding everywhere. Four Corners on their CommInsure problem, scandals in financial planning, and a lot more that the bank knew about but hadn't hit the papers yet. And they certainly knew about them. They're noted in the board packs and all the minutes. And the chief risk officer at the time wrote to suggest that everyone should get their full bonus. With the exception of the executive who was in charge of CommInsure, who should get a 5% crimping. The chair went further and said that Ian the Rev, the then CEO, should get 108% of his bonus. And interestingly, this happened, and they took that to the end of the general meeting, and the general public did what these people who had access to much better information should have done, and that is they went 108% ballistic and said, absolutely not. Do you guys not read the papers? Do you not know the trouble that you're in and the terrible situation you put your customers in? You cannot have your full bonuses. And they got a strike that year. So it has been instructive to look at that executive remuneration system, which is still not fixed and still very problematic because they do need a mix of financial and non-financial targets. The problem is that non-financial risk was so low as a category that anything, it didn't matter what you did, reputational damage, all these kind of issues, didn't matter as much as hitting the target. If you hit the target, you're good.
Everything's okay.
And, it doesn't matter what level of the chain you're at and how much coin you're playing for in the jackpot. If your boss tells you to do something, and it's written down very clearly, and there's an incentive, you'll probably work hard to achieve it. And, will there be corners cut? Will people get hurt along the way? Well, maybe. But you've been set a task, you've been told very clearly, and you're being incentivized massively to do it. It's more likely to happen.
Absolutely. And so maybe one of the non-financial targets should be not going to jail, I suppose. And so given that we don't seem to be sending very many people to jail for we needed this Royal Commission and hundreds of billions of dollars of what do you call it, money laundering and hundreds of millions of fines and all that type of stuff like that. But in the end, for the person on the streets going, well, if I rob a bank, I go to jail. If the bank robs me, everyone's fine.
There will be, it is hard because it's a long time. So February is when the report came out, the final report came out from the Royal Commission. And, I'm talking to you, it's October. There have been a few actions taken. There'll be more in the next year. The judges have already been appointed. They're literally called the Hayne appointees.
Yep.
So there are going to be substantial cases, I think some of them criminal, next year. There won't be many. But also, there won't need to be many. Because one of the most boring but important recommendations, buried way down like number 72 or something, was that products will have to have individual responsibility. Because for a long time, within banks, when there were problems with products or things would go wrong, there's this really diffuse ownership structure of who's in charge of this thing. Well, this department's in charge of this part of it, and this, these people made it, but they don't sell it. And, so it was very hard to kind of pin down a person. In future, a single person will have to say, that is my product. And coupled with a few high-profile criminal and civil prosecutions of institutions and people, that will, I think, have the biggest impact of the entire Royal Commission.
Yeah.
Because people will say, well, I'm not signing it. That's not my product.
Yeah.
You sign it.
Yeah, well, exactly, and that's where I'm coming from. Is that it still seems to me, certainly from the public perspective, is it because there hasn't been anyone hung up yet to
It is
hung
very
up.
unlikely anyone is going to jail.
Yeah.
You are looking at to get into financial services, you essentially need to have a clean criminal record.
Yep.
So there's going to be first-time offenders for non-violent acts
Yep.
that have taken place in a kind of committee agreement environment
Yep.
where there is legal advice suggesting it's okay. There are certainly some situations that were exposed at the Royal Commission where those people have some extremely serious questions to answer. And these are very senior people.
Yeah.
And even on the evidence that was presented, they've basically been told, hey, the legal department says this isn't legal. And they've responded back and said, well, we're doing it.
Yeah,
So,
and when you're getting paid a couple of $1 million a year to make those decisions, it's pretty hard to say, well, I wasn't a lawyer, I didn't really understand.
Exactly. So, but these are going to be very hard fought cases. I wouldn't be expecting to be requiring a new wing of a prison anytime soon.
Yeah.
But there will be substantial prosecutions.
Which would seem to say to me that if you're a budding capitalist starting at your bank and all that type of stuff, and you hear about this Royal Commission stuff that happened last year, and that was pretty bad, but no one went to jail, and shareholders paid a bunch of fines, but it wasn't anyone involved with the bank, and a few people had their bonuses cut by 20%. So saying, oh well, that's
Sounds like a good industry.
Absolutely. Look, but for me, the interesting cultural parallel is with workplace health and safety. So it used to be 25, 30 years ago, completely standard to walk past someone operating a jackhammer who didn't have ear protection on, to see people working on a roof 4 stories up and there were no barriers on the side of the roof. So, if that person would fall off, well, they'd probably die. They'd certainly be so injured they would have a catastrophic impact on their life. We've changed that culture through regulation and through societal pressure, and it cost money. It made things slower and harder. Now, in the end, it probably saved money because you didn't have the cost of so many people being hurt.
Yep.
But, we changed that culture, and Australia has one of the world's best occupational health and safety systems. Now, people still die at work, right? Things happen. But, we do our best at preventing that.
Yep.
And we can do the same with risk culture in financial services. We can make it so that, in the same way that people used to be totally down with drink driving or, would boast about how fast they'd been speeding on the weekend, you can turn these cultures around. You can make change.
If there's broad-based support for changing those. I
and
agree with
if
you.
there is, and there's regulation, and oftentimes it's top down.
And do you think there is? I mean, and let me put this into context as well, because one of the biggest ones was the whole thing about the HEM, and we've spoken a fair bit. So I'm hoping most of our listeners know about it. But basically, yeah, that's right. But it's basically that just the really quick version is that basically banks were using a poverty measure to assess people's eligibility, which meant that they could lend them a hell of a lot more than what they could have otherwise, and so that led to this huge growth in mortgages from sort of 2012 in particular to 2017 sort of, and then once the Royal Commission started, that then stopped, and all the banks sort of pulled it right back, and that led house prices to fall 15%, depending upon where you were. Then we hit the election, and surprise win to Morrison, and 4 days later, APRA comes out and says, you know what, we're changing you don't need to assess people at 7.5% anymore. We're lowering the rate. The banks can work. Banks have shown themselves to be pretty good at sorting out loans. They can sort this out for themselves. And then you've got the Treasurer and the Prime Minister both saying we need to get credit flowing. We need to push it out there. So to me, that's sending a bit of a mixed message. 6 months after the Royal Commission. And would seem to say that there's not a lot of support at the upper levels for the changes you're talking about in terms of saying let's make our financial system safer for.
I don't think there is a huge amount of support. The government didn't want to hold the Royal Commission. Is taking a year and a half to enact all of the legislative changes it requires to bring it into law. On the tram on the way here, I was trying to move around the words responsible lending laws into different combinations to see if it could say anything other than responsible lending laws or laws about responsible lending, and you can't.
You just need an IR in front of that.
Yeah, the problem with responsible lending laws is they're, laws that guarantee responsible lending. So, I mean, the government, I think, is trying to deal with a problem. The problem is they say the economy is really strong and everything is great, whereas all these really boring indicators like consumer confidence and house prices and the stock exchange and stuff disagree. So I think they're trying to deal with a political problem by focusing attention on Australia's least loved institutions, the large banks, and putting the pressure back on them. But certainly they're trying to say two things. I mean, when lending contracted in the wake of the Royal Commission, everyone's like, oh, there's a contraction. It's not a contraction. They started following the law.
Yeah. Oh,
now,
absolutely.
They always should have been. And the reason they didn't, which is probably why house prices in our major capital cities went up 75% in about 6 or 7 years or something.
Yeah.
So they've come down a touch and everyone's kind of lost their minds, forgetting that, hey, this is not normal. Like, it's been on a rocket ride. So, and part of what fueled that rocket ride was banks ignoring people's personal situation, breaching responsible lending laws to give them more money as part of this insane arms race that has led to us having some of the highest household debt
in the world.
I think we're number two. Number two.
Absolutely.
But you know what? I reckon we can climb the mountain.
Yeah. Well, if we start lending 95% to first home buyers, because they obviously need to, there's our, that's how we've got all this irresponsible lending. What we need to do, first home buyers, they haven't got any debt. Let's load them up with 95% and send them on their way so they can feel part of society.
It is always, I mean, our system of taxation is very focused on housing. You guys are much deeper in this than I am, but we have prioritized it as an asset class. Okay, so there's 3 times as much money in the housing market as there is in the stock market. And to a point, that's a great thing. We've really pushed those values. Fantastic.
I'll argue against that, but
anyway. Yeah. So great. It's now cheaper to buy a house in Manhattan than it is in Melbourne. But that has certainly taken a lot of money out of really active and interesting parts of our economy. If you look at how exposed our stock exchange is, for example, to technology, to innovation, it's a fraction. It's a terrifying fraction, particularly when you look at where the global economy is going. There was a report last week about our complexity, our economic complexity in Australia, and the headline, and the Fin Review is very good, was kind of, hot and dumb, and getting dumber. We have a decreasingly complex economy. We are relying more on digging stuff up, providing nothing in the value chain, and shipping it out. And that's okay for a while. But I think that while is over.
Yeah. And for me, it's the person on the street who's like, what's your life goal? And you go to someone in California or something like that, and an ambitious person, and they're like, oh, I'm going to start a company and do this. I'm going to do, I'm going to set up this. I'm going to get an exporter, an importer, whatever it is. Over here, it's like, I'm going to buy a property. I'm going to do it up, and I'm going to negative gear it.
Yeah.
And look at all this money I'm going to make. Someone's going to pay for my. And you're like, just a minute. Well, how have you added to society?
Yeah.
Yes.
No, we're really stuck, and it's going to be very hard to unwind the housing thing because people have a deep emotional connection to it, but also because the lobby that keeps those lurks going is very strong.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the Labor Party has taken changes.
Our Prime Minister was part of that lobby for.
Absolutely, but look, the opposition took changes to negative gearing to the last 2 elections. They lost them both. I would say that policy is dead for a good 10 years.
Yeah. Well, and in a way, not that I'm a big supporter of rolling back the negative gearing, at least classifying, saying let's just leave it to just income rather than what you're owning as well. But I think the biggest fear for people who are supportive was that Bill Shorten did get in. We were already in a house price crash. You got another 10-15% house price crash, and all of a sudden, the next election, you had people voted in going, we will never, ever take negative gearing away again, and then you got another 50 years of it. So hoping the house...
That's a bit too crystal ball-y for me. Yeah. I can't go that deep. But look, certainly, we have... It is prioritised as an asset. It is... People want to put their money in there. And look, and part of that is other factors that people don't take into account In every state other than Victoria, our rental laws are appalling. You know, if you rent a property overseas and you'd come back, you'd be like, what is going on? Like, you can't even put up a picture. You can't have a cat. You can't stay for 3 years. You know, when you look at rental laws overseas, they very much favour the renter because they want them to live there, not just breathe in and out whilst they're there and then living inside an asset. They treat it as a house for that person.
Yeah.
So I actually think that's taken out of the equation. I think if changes like that would actually have a big impact and would probably take some of the sting out of the housing market. People wouldn't be so desperate to buy if renting was more of a lifestyle. But here, we absolutely punish renters, and as a result, they're desperate to get into the market by hook or by crook.
Yeah. So net effect of all that is, no, you're not expecting things to change.
No, I'm not expecting things to change.
That's right. It's back onto the gravy train. We've got a short period of contrition, and then we're back to normal. But actually, that hits on something else I had. And I thought it came very strongly from your book, and I want to preface this by saying one of my things I try to do with investment is I try not to listen to CEOs live very much because I don't think it helps my investment because these guys are very charismatic people. Like you don't get to be the head of a couple of $1 billion company without actually having few people get to the head without.
I wouldn't say it's a blanket rule, but keep going.
But yeah, lead through. But at least you must be persuasive about something. Yes,
be a good sales
just your ability to get that job. And so, and one of the things that really came across to me, especially from reading your book, was that I looked at, I guess on the facts side and what was coming out, and you'd look at someone like CBA, for example, that. Diversification, depth, all that type of stuff of what it was doing wrong was dramatic. Like it managed to hit every area. Like
all divisions seemed to, everyone had their problem.
There was all that type of stuff, but they were contrite. Oh, look, we fired that guy, and he was some guy who mentioned, this guy mentioned, hey, maybe there might be a problem with stealing money from our customers. And he got knocked down, and he kept on, and so he kept stealing money from customers. We promoted him to CEO now, and we've fired these people, and so really, how sorry are we? And they seem to sail through this Royal Commission, which, as you said, was pretty much made for them.
It's interesting. I mean, probably the hardest question to answer for the chair of the Commonwealth Bank, Catherine Livingstone, was Matt Comyn, who is the CEO. Was the CEO of the division in which most of these issues occurred.
Yeah.
So what message did it send to promote him? And Ms. Livingstone answered in the way, obviously he's a very accomplished person, and why they did. And they just kept pressing this question, like, yeah, no, you haven't answered it. What message did it send that you promoted this person? And Ms. Livingstone really struggled to answer because I don't know that she'd really thought about the message that it sent.
Well, I'd disagree in that they'd thought. I think internally they'd thought, hey, we need to get somebody who's a bit of a clean stand. Look, we've actually got evidence of him showing that things were wrong. so at least
attempting to fix those problems within his own division.
So it's a marketing spin. We've got a marketing spin we can put on it. But as you said, when you're lined up to say, well, just a minute, why didn't you pick somebody else off the street? That's Yeah.
Well, I think their choice was, do you go with someone who knows the organisation and has a better chance of fixing it, or do you get someone from outside who is going to come in? And the quote that caused much mirth in the Royal Commission was Ms. Livingstone said, look, basically, if you're looking for people at that level, you're not going to find anyone in the entire world who hasn't been involved in some kind of regulatory problem.
That. Yeah, with a clean set of sheets.
And then everyone laughed and she went, no, I'm serious.
Yes. Yeah, we shouldn't be laughing here. There should be.
Yes, I was not intending to be amusing. It's serious.
Yeah.
Just quickly while we're on the going back to casting our mind back over the Royal Commission, so we had Wayne Byers, the chair of APRA, and he was in the stand, and less about why he was in the stand. The question was just around how there was a public outburst afterwards. It was towards the end of your book there, but essentially
after he got out.
No, he was just getting called off the witness box, I think, and a gentleman got up. And there was a big public outburst in really letting him know about it. It was less about what that particular topic was about, more about because you spent so much time in the actual room. Was that a common thing, or was it with you were talking before, there was a bit of a laugh, there's a bit of interaction from the gallery, against the topic of the day. Was that part of the Was that a common thing? Yeah.
It was surprisingly uncommon. I mean, I thought we're holding a Royal Commission. You've got journos from every masthead here. People are going to be standing up all day to get dragged out. It actually only probably happened about 3 or 4 times. I can think of 3, but I think there might have been one more where people would stand up, rant for a little while. And in almost every case, security knew their name.
Wow.
Like afterwards, they'd be like, Mr. Wilson, come on, please, Mr. Wilson, let's go.
Gee whiz. Yeah.
They're totally across it. There was a surprising amount of interest in different fields. So financial planning, huge crowds packing in. In Darwin, just the journos. It's a very expensive place to get to. It's hard to reach. In Brisbane, packed. Again, issues of farming, finance. People, in Queensland don't shy at a long drive. They were all there. It was, you could have filled a stadium in Brisbane.
Yeah.
So, there was a lot of public interest in the commission, but yes, there was a lot of back and forth. There was, this is a crowd there, and certainly when the CEOs were there were people laughing, jeering, gasping. It's very rare to see these people answering very difficult questions.
Having to answer.
Exactly, being
asked
forced
questions,
to answer very difficult questions.
Yeah.
And if they don't feel like they've answered fully, asking them again.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, thanks for that.
So coming back to this contrition side, because that was one of the things that, so I talked about CBA coming across very contrite. And so I guess that was where we were talking with this. And so I guess that's where I'm saying to you, does it feel as if contrition was one of the main factors in there that sort of led to how they came out of the report?
I don't know. I mean, I think there are things that we will never know that shape that report. I think things that occurred in the interactions between the bank and the commission that are hinted at in some aspects that go to how the different banks fared, essentially. I think the banks are contrite. They know they have to be. I mean, for me, the larger issue, as the banks spend hundreds of millions of dollars fixing these problems, is that they have really torched trust in institutions that have existed for over 100 years at precisely the time when they need it the most. So,
And what do you mean by that?
well, in a time when neobanks are on the rise, switching is becoming easier than ever. Consumers are, through things like private health insurance and aggregators, becoming more attuned to switching products and demanding better, as they do with mobile phones, as they do with their other services. And at a time when large global players who are borderless, frictionless, much better at technology. The Australian banks are very good at digital banking, but these guys are even better. Are threatening to come in at any moment. The banks need to be able to say to Australia, hey, yes, you use Facebook, but look at the problems they have with privacy. Would you really trust them with your money? You can trust us. And what they've done is they've created a situation where people will go, well, yeah, I don't really trust Facebook with my money, but I don't really trust you either.
Yeah.
And they're offering me a 2% credit card or whatever they eventually, whatever product eventually comes out from Apple, Google, Amazon, Facebook, someone sitting in the garage in Palo Alto we don't know about yet.
Yeah.
All of these players are looking to get into what is a very fat and profitable field, which is transactions and mortgages. And, they want some of that cash and they will take it.
Yeah, because one of the ones that really struck me was just in relative. So I spoke about CBA, and at the other end of the scale, IOOF. Now, they obviously came out of this, CEO gone, chairman gone, bashed and all that type of stuff like that. When you look at the problem, I mean, and it was definitely, I'm not in any way, I don't want to downplay the problem, but in the end, I think it was $6.6 million had been overpaid to investors. And so they had then gone, well, that's a problem. Let's take the money back from investors and recycle it to them effectively.
So essentially, instead of the company paying for the mistake, let's make the investors pay for the mistake.
Yeah, that's right. But so it was a relatively small amount when you look at the depth,
billions
and
of dollars of funds
of CBA. But also when you look at all these things CBA had done, and also in a way for some of those people who were paying were the ones who had benefited. There were a bunch in there who hadn't, or new customers and all that. So there's certainly an issue there, which But in the end, the issue itself was a couple of $1 million. But it was more that, as you said, they were like stonewalling. No, we're not paying for this. And, everything was all about making sure the customer paid and then not admitting any fault. So I guess what I'm saying is, to me, that came out as one person who was like, yeah, okay, they definitely had an issue and trustees and people like that should have probably been fired, and that question about what their role and all that sort of stuff. But it was their reaction to the Royal Commission that really drove CEO Gawn. And that
I think with IWF, what you can say is, well, that's probably one they thought they could get them on.
Yeah.
It is worth noting that the regulator APRA tried to get the top 5 senior executives booted from working in superannuation and failed.
Right.
They lost that case recently. IWF has always had problematic relations with the regulator.
Yep.
And that issue that was discussed, which has occurred, which they have done in multiple other funds, they've since admitted where there's been a problem, and instead of the company paying for the mistake, the investors have paid for the mistake.
Yep.
I think that might have been one of those situations where you just choose the best thing you've got on someone rather than
knowing that you've got all
biggest or the most the most impossible. You get the one where you got the tightest case.
Yeah, fair enough.
I'm not. I'll add again, as well as not being an investment advisor, I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah. Yes, because that was and Westpac, you said, talked about being the most combative in terms of their relationship with ASIC and APRA.
The regulators have said that.
Yes.
And Westpac essentially agreed with that assessment.
Yeah.
They had over time attempted to reset their relationship, but the regulator's assessment, I do apologise, I don't remember the specific reference, but it is regulators who have said the most difficult to deal with.
Buy your book and it'll be in there.
Yeah, that's right. Please look up that reference. I'm not making this up. Someone else said it. It's not my opinion.
But they seem to get away as well with relatively unscathed from the whole, for when you come in, you go, well, coming into this Royal Commission, we've got CBA, so you expect coming out of it just with the broad bit, CBA, okay, they're going to come out pretty bad because they're the whole reason it started. Westpac's the most combative, and, halfway through, everyone else keeps on saying, oh, yeah, okay, here's our problem, here's an enforceable undertaking. They're like, no, we're not admitting, we'll do the court case. And they came out of it pretty well, I would have thought.
Well, yes, but I mean, they still keep adding to the total of money they've got to pay back to people.
Yeah.
That total keeps rising, and they're across a much broader spectrum of areas that have proven to be problematic that a lot of the banks have gotten out of, like car loans, funds management, that kind of vertical integration. They've kept it. They still have the funds management model. So whilst they probably came out with fewer public scams, it's certainly been very expensive. Look, going into this, no one would have thought that AMP would have the biggest problems, that you'd have a company that's a third of its market value from a year ago. They've lost most of their senior leaders, and essentially the brand is circling the drain. Billions of dollars have walked out of their superannuation management, as it has at IWF as well. They have huge problems about their future. And
Absolutely.
I don't think people would have expected that as one of the top line items out of the Royal Commission.
Yeah, and there's one thing I got from your book very much as well, is that whole, I always wondered from the Macquarie side, is you go, well, what happened to Macquarie? How come they, and you'd seen that they obviously had a lot of problems a few years ago, and the thing that struck me as well is they've been one of the most aggressive expanding home loans in the recent times, especially as all the other banks were pulling back, they were piling in. And so when it was like, oh, here's Macquarie's turn,
we certainly expect it. We're like, oh yeah, Macquarie, here we go. You never get to look inside. Here we are.
Yeah.
It's the nation's best paid person at a listed company. Here we go. And they're in for an hour.
Yeah, wow.
And what you did get out of that very brief hearing, and obviously the entire Royal Commission was extremely brief, so they clearly had to choose their targets, was that they were decisive about wrongdoing. So there was a situation where a particular division had an issue that had hurt customers, and not only did they boot everyone who was at all involved, the senior executive who had oversight of the division but had no knowledge of the scandal, didn't matter. bonus gone.
Yeah, right.
You know, like you're on your last warning.
Not,
You know, like
not like a 5% cut.
no, exactly, not like a 5% cut,
Yeah.
like a serious.
Yeah.
This is your last warning.
Yeah.
You're like
Yeah.
it was
As
and-
you'd expect.
but that was the surprising thing. All the journos sitting there were been salivating about Macquarie coming to the dock, and we're just kind of like, I think they like the Macquarie model of paying someone $20 million a year. But what really flowed out of Macquarie was that like actions have consequences, and so even if it's a non-financial risk, we take it seriously. And that was a thing that the banks didn't do. They were very timid with each other, even amongst the executive team, even amongst the board.
Yeah.
They wouldn't ask the hard questions. They wouldn't, like literally someone would walk out of their division, there's smoke pouring out the door, and the executive would be like, how are you? Oh, good. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. See you on the weekend. Like they just weren't harsh enough critics internally. And as a result, these problems just kept rolling.
Yeah, absolutely. Mortgage brokers. Doesn't look like much is happening there.
Mortgage brokers are an interesting cohort
I think
of
you've
people.
got a whole chapter in your book. devoted to this.
How many more emails do I want to receive from mortgage brokers is probably the question I'm asking myself right now. If you are listening, you're a mortgage broker, I'm sure you're an excellent mortgage broker. Okay, you don't need to get in contact with me. I'm sure you're an excellent mortgage broker.
What is your email address? Did you want to?
Well, that's for that at the end.
Mate, the problem is that when you look across the broking industry, there are really obvious conflicts of interest. Like there are. I don't know why people bother emailing me saying that there's not. There are, right? And all the research is in. If you go with a mortgage broker, your loan will be larger, it will be longer, and you are more likely statistically to get into arrears. Now, there are reasons for those things, right? Mortgage brokers take on some harder cases. They take on some people the banks have knocked back. But it is unavoidable that Australians pay a lot more for their loans, and in some cases get saddled with very unsuitable loans because mortgage brokers arrange them.
Some mortgage brokers.
Some mortgage
I'll
brokers.
protect
The
you.
bad mortgage
ones.
brokers.
Not,
The few.
Not anyone listening who's
No,
obviously a good
exactly.
mortgage broker.
And there are really disastrous outcomes of that. Now, the reason I say I don't need emails from mortgage brokers is I know there are excellent mortgage brokers doing a wonderful job. I've used mortgage brokers. Of course I have. It's a service. I can't be bothered looking across with any expertise at all the loans that are available. I'm going to pay someone to do it for me. But I'm going to do it with my eyes open. I know these people are getting paid, and I ask them about the different financial arrangements for the different products they're presenting to me.
Yeah.
I am not a standard consumer, and 60% of Australians are using mortgage brokers, and I don't understand how they've become, like the chemists, a kind of this protected class where there can be no change, otherwise the sky will fall in. It won't. What will happen is it will be more transparent. Those conflicts of interest will be nutted out, or at least placed in open view, and people can make their own decisions.
Yeah, it's always, to me, it's always that the analogy I like is the one about saying, if I go to a doctor and I tell them here's all my problems and I expect them to come up with a solution, but when I go to a used car salesman and say I've got this problem, I really need a car,
Have I got the one for you?
Exactly. I'm treating them both very differently. I know that guy's going to try and
do you know
flog
what?
me whatever he's got in his yard.
Fighting change, as mortgage brokers are doing now and financial planners are doing as well, it doesn't help in the long run. There's a reason that when you go to the dentist and the dentist says, this one has to come out, you don't go, well, I'm going to get 3 other opinions because I think you probably just want to drill my teeth to make more money. No, you go, okay, you've done the study, you're an expert, I've come to you, and I trust you.
Yeah.
People do not have that relationship with mortgage brokers and I would say in many cases financial planners because they haven't deemed themselves worthy of being called a profession.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that the people in those industries are bad. They're not. They're doing a good job for their customers. But if they want to be more respected as an industry and they want to be taken seriously as a profession, they have to do the things that make you get taken seriously, which is always work in the best interests of customers in a way that is unquestioned. If you have an industry that is fighting the imposition of the words that you have to work in the best interests of your customers, that says everything. That says absolutely everything you need to know.
Absolutely.
And they are fighting hard to stop those words being imposed on their industry.
Absolutely. Well, Tim's a financial planner. He's a
And I'm going through financial advice, FASIA it's called, the education standards. It's,
Yep.
so we're
And
working through
you're
that at the
dealing
moment.
with people's life savings and the most substantial financial issues that they'll deal with. And the people that come to you should know that you have a bachelor's level of education. I don't
Absolutely.
think that's unreasonable.
Yeah,
and I
look-
think the time frame they put in was perfectly reasonable. This has been coming since 2013.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, that is enough time to
Yep.
squeeze out you could become a doctor in that time. They're not asking for that.
Well, and I think there's a bit of a cleansing sort of element to the whole thing as well, which is creating a lot of media flack at the top end, but at the younger end, at my end, I guess, of people that have come in or career moved, as you say, it's largely I came from an engineering background where qualifications were a key component of building bridges and making sure the job was done.
You
right.
can't be an engineer for fun, right?
Can't hang a shingle.
You can't turn up to a job and go, I'm interested in engineering. I'm going to be the person in charge of where this bridge is strong enough to put trucks over and not kill anyone. And that's why engineering's a profession.
Yep.
And financial planning will become a profession.
I think
but
so
it's
too.
not there yet.
No, it's a little way to go.
Yeah, and my story is always of a somebody I know who's out of the industry now, but as everything came in, and their qualification for financial planning was they used to sell suits, so
Yeah.
looks good in a suit. Fantastic. This person can.
And look, and I'm not saying those people are bad financial planners. Many of them have decades of experience and are really good at it.
some of them are.
But that's the thing, right?
A lot. Yeah.
And the thing with degrees is that they don't prove that you're going to be good at a particular field, but they tick the box that says, well, at least I have been exposed to the key ideas and the issues that arise.
That's right. Yeah.
And we've weeded out the casual con men who are happy to do a quick 5-minute brush up and shine my shoes and put on a nice
And
suit.
every
and try
time
and sell
that
you
a
something.
qualification is added to a field like financial planning or real estate or something like that, the first thing that happens is a lot of the shonks get out, right? Because it's too hard.
Yep.
They move on to the next easy. There's always another option.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
And so that's the first, best, easiest thing that occurs. And look, I have great sympathy for people who later in life have to go back and achieve a bachelor's degree or equivalent in financial planning. But for most of them, with the experience they have, it's not going to be a huge issue.
Well, that's right. Yeah, it's just whether or not it's worth the cost and the time and, running businesses and families and everything as well. So, but at the end of the day, it's a lever that I think is going to need to be pulled to bring everything in line, as you say. So,
Yeah. Now the other one we're involved in as well. So superannuation. So we sort of started the company for largely a lot of the reasons we sort of see a lot of the problems we see in superannuation, and that whole bit about this great, this 10% of your money flowing into these guys who, and a lot of them are sitting there charging fees for advice where they don't give advice. But to me, superannuation in particular is a sort of a starting version of advice, and now you've got two bits when you first start your money in and when you retire, and most of the rest of it isn't really doesn't need a yearly bit. So I guess the bits that came out of that, there's obviously trustee issues, the big ones about making sure that the trustee is separate and not part of the same organisation. And we sort of go, yes, we.
I think when NAB and AMP were shown to have about 10 to 15 people working their trustee office, looking after your multiple hundreds of billions of dollars, it might have become pretty obvious that actually I think they're relying on the parent company a little bit for pretty much everything.
Yeah, and don't charge dead people. I got as well very much from your book.
Well,
pretty common.
I have great sympathy with the banks on that particular issue because obviously it grabs people's attention. The main problem with dead people is they don't notify you when they die. The issue for the banks was that in many cases they knew they were charging dead people because the estate, someone from the estate would contact them. The problem was what they did about it, which was very little.
Yeah.
In most cases, they just kept paying back the money. The trustee would call again. They'd pay back the money. They couldn't work out a way to fix it. And, this is where I have some sympathy for them. They were, looking at spending hundreds of billions of dollars to kind of fix the systems, and one of the things being to these
Yeah,
things.
it's a bit of an excuse, I reckon. But anyway.
I mean, look, I thought it couldn't be topped. And then in the insurance round, AMP was charging life insurance premiums to people they knew were dead. Not people who were dead, people they knew were dead.
Right.
And they're charging them life insurance premiums. At which point, what can you do?
Yeah.
Go home. Nothing will be better today.
That's right. We have our headline for the day. Yes. Regulation. So this is the one where, and as I said, it came out of every little bit seemed to come out to say regulation is the issue. We need to have regulators that are on the case. And it seems to me that ASIC's come out relatively strongly on the case. I'm not sure how much, and though they do look like they probably do need a few more powers, it doesn't seem the government's particularly keen to give them all the powers they want. I don't know what your read is on it.
Both of the ACCC has been pretty left out, right?
Yes.
So we'll leave them alone.
Yep.
ASIC,
And the other one, the one who's doing the money laundering, they
Austrac.
they seem to be on the case.
they seem to they have everyone's attention.
Yeah, that's
ever
right.
Since the $700 million fine for the Commonwealth Bank, everyone is very aware that Austrac exists.
Yes, so we'll sweep those two aside.
Yes,
and and
So
ASIC and APRA.
ASIC and APRA, who are your two key regulators in the financial space. It was interesting that the Royal Commission basically said we don't need much new regulation, just enforce the regulation that exists. Already there's been some cases been run, some have been won, some have been lost. I think probably what will happen is that regulators will keep losing cases.
Yep.
Because they're really difficult to prove. You know, there's a reason that they relied so much on enforceable undertakings, is that going to court is expensive, time-consuming and risky. Like, you might not win. And then once you don't win, there's some case law for the next time you try and run the same case, working against you. So I think we'll probably reach a pivot point where the regulators just lost a certain number of cases, high-profile cases against large institutions where the law will have to change around certain things.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they shouldn't keep going for those cases. I mean, like even running them and losing, don't worry, you have everyone's attention.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, and even just the fact you're dragging in all the major the CEOs and all that type of stuff to actually have to address these issues.
There is nothing. I haven't had to do it myself, but being dragged to court to answer for a breach of the law is a very exposing experience. And it is very formative for the people who are involved. And I think everyone would safely say, well, I never want to do that again.
Yeah, exactly. So there's, so that probably gives me more. So what you're saying is we probably do need some law changes if we want to have more convictions, but it will make a difference the more cases they're running anyway.
Also, and governments are understandably very loath to make retrospective laws that look back in time.
Yes.
So any legal changes will be about going forward.
Yeah.
And there are good reasons that retrospective laws are done extremely rarely. But look, the regulator will take more cases. They've said they will. They're going to litigate more, even if they lose. But I think the issue will be they'll reach a certain point where they just keep losing.
Yeah, and they need to have, but this is ASIC we're talking about.
And APRA.
Okay, so
APRA's had the most recent loss.
Yeah.
They tried to get the heads of IOOF booted from the superannuation industry for breaching the what's called the CIS Act.
Yeah.
And they failed.
Yeah.
So, that doesn't mean that IOOF's been exonerated, but in the way that court works, well, they've been acquitted.
Yes, and so they couldn't be proven guilty as opposed to they're innocent. Yes.
No, you don't get proven innocent. And let me tell you,
yes.
when you're walking through the cameras into court, that becomes pretty clear. You don't get proven innocent, but you can beat charges.
Yes, and so the question for me is, especially in light of what we saw with APRA changing the rules back, pretty quickly, and also, I guess the guy who was in ASIC, you're saying, okay, well, James Shipton's been around for about a year or so when the whole thing had started, so he's relatively clean skinned in terms of the whole thing, and he'd pretty upfront about, yes, we need to make a lot of changes. I think APRA's got the same guy who's been there since the start. And he's just
since the start of the financial system, hasn't
it? That's right. Since the start of APRA, and he's just been given another 5-year term. There's been a few things where he's pulled back on the hem. I guess there's from an outsider looking in, it seems as if they don't seem to be as proactive, and it seems a little bit business as usual.
I think that would be a fairly safe view. It was interesting in the changes to APRA that were noted. Essentially, they said, look, we're going to get into superannuation, and also superannuation will not be looked over by our boss. It's going to be part of a different division.
Yeah.
I think some of the really boring but important stuff from the Royal Commission was there's going to be essentially oversight of the regulators, and they're going to publish every year what they've been up to. And I think those reports start to get pretty exposing if you're not taking action, if you're not doing stuff.
Yep.
I mean, APRA didn't take any court action about superannuation in 10 years. I don't expect the coming decade to be the same.
Yeah. But the bit I worry about for that, especially, is we're obviously not a $100 billion organisation as of yet, but is whether that means that the smaller one. It's a question: is do you then clamp down and you crack down on all the smaller ones and you go, well, the bigger, because in the end, if they come at a small person with a decent sized legal team, they're unlikely to have the same. Whereas you come at CBA with a decent sized legal team, they'll have 3 times more resources.
I asked James Shipton of ASIC this very question because the first case they took was against Dover Financial, who are a minnow financial planning firm, most famous for their founder, Terry McMaster, collapsing in the dock under questioning at the Royal Commission. And I said, why did you go after them first? What message does that send? And he basically said the case was ready, so we ran it. Like, it wasn't about what message will it send to this be the first prosecution after the Royal Commission. It was just, it's ready, go. We are going to litigate. We are going to litigate. We've said we're going to litigate more. This one's ready to go. All the ducks are in a row. Send the documents.
Yeah.
So I think they're going to, certainly the ASIC side, litigate more. APRA, it's really harder to say. But they've already been in court. They've run and lost. Expect them to run again. They had a lot of referrals from the Royal Commission. They'll be working through them. And I think we'll see them come to fruition.
Yeah, excellent.
So you've touched on a couple of times the brevity of the Royal Commission itself. It's just, it was very tight time frames to cover so much, so many topics, so many different facets of the financial part of Australia. The odds on seeing another one in the next few years, as someone who's lived and breathed it now and feeling like there's still a lot to say.
The journalists I covered the whole thing. There was a couple of journalists who covered most of it. And our joke towards the end, because it was 2018 that the Royal Commission was held, was hashtag RC23.
Wow.
Which was, see you in 5 years. This will slide back. And look, people with longer memories than mine will know that that's not an impossible thought. The headlines fade, people move on, people go back to their very old, maybe not great, but highly profitable habits.
Yep.
I think this one will be a little bit different because there's been a few structural changes that essentially keep the spotlight on. But, these are really big ships to turn around. And hopefully the people at the helm of them are committed to making things better for their customers, which in the end will make things better for their shareholders as well as their employees. I mean, it is so many of the scandals we saw at the Royal Commission were about really small amounts of money, right? They weren't even making much out of not providing this service to make this fee.
But in aggregate, though.
But in aggregate, and also they're emblematic of other issues and of other cultures of saying, well, if there's a choice, we know what we're going to choose. So they've destroyed long-term value for very short-term gain. I think there'll be big changes to the remuneration practices that will really blow out the timelines for when you get that money. It's not going to be enough to say it was good this year and no one's found any problems in 2 years, so that's good enough. Yeah. I think those timelines are going to get a lot longer. And I think banks are going to ask each other themselves harder questions. I think boards will ask for more evidence. I think managers will ask, really tougher questions. They certainly need to than they were demonstrated to have done in the Royal Commission.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm putting my money on 2028. I sort of figure
2028, 10 years.
Yeah,
10
I
years.
reckon you need 5 years of. I think it's a bit like you're a bit tired late at night. And you almost have all of a sudden you almost have something an accident and you jerk and you're awake and you're like, mate, I'm really looking at everything now. Give it a little bit of time to calm down, a little bit of time for boards to turn over. And
Bunch of new execs.
bunch of execs, young people who are like, oh, that was before I even started in the industry. And,
It wouldn't be surprising me if there's some kind of update in
need
5 years where they
Yeah.
basically say, well, it's been 5 years since then. Whether I don't think it'll be a royal commission, but I think there'll be
Yeah.
something that will examine, well, these were really serious issues that led to it.
Yeah.
What's happened since?
Yeah, hope so.
Could it just be something where they just say, submit your 50 pages again? You know?
Well, a lot of consumer advocates I've talked to have said, yes, there should, like, it would be great if there was one in 5 years because then everyone would know,
Yeah.
like, you have to fix this stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
It's coming.
we're coming back.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm sure Mr. Hayne would be up for it.
Yeah, excellent.
Very good. Okay, well, Dan Ziffer, thanks very much for coming along. It's very mindful of time. Do you mind just letting our listeners know how they can get in touch with some of your work and where to find you?
Sure. I'm a business reporter on the ABC. You can watch The Business at 9:45 every night on our news channel or at 11 o'clock on the main channel or on iView anytime. I'm on Twitter at Dan Ziffer. Always, journalists are easy to find. Journalists are easy to
And your
find.
book is obviously in all good bookstores.
My book is in good and bad bookstores.
Bookstores,
And I will...
We'll post a link in the show notes for it.
Yeah,
Thank you. And I'll be at writers' festivals in different states in the coming months.
Okay, fantastic. Look forward to that. Cheers. Thank you.
Yeah, so we spoke at the start. So just, I guess, a bit of a recap on how that affects our investment views and any thoughts sort of arising from discussion with Dan is, we spoke at the start about the three different effects that we were really looking at. One is this effect on longer term bank profitability. Secondly is the effect on the housing market and credit. And finally, some of the regulatory effects on other sectors. So I think probably safe to say in terms of the second one is probably the easier one in the housing market issues is that there does seem to be a lot of support from higher levels of Australian government and not a lot of pushback from APRA. So it does seem as if the credit issues that we had in terms of credit being constrained to the economy are going away in the short term. There's some court case effects that are going on where ASIC has appealed the decision, and they'll be back to federal court. So possibly we've got a year or so of I guess tempered enthusiasm in that area. But it does look as if the current government is very keen to get lending going again, and get back to irresponsible lending, so to speak, from and so I think from that perspective we haven't seen anything really particularly different. I guess the effect on longer term bank profitability, I was probably I've probably come out slightly less cynical. I do think there is some scope. I think what Dan was saying about the more court cases being prosecuted will actually make a difference regardless of whether they're successful or not.
That was an interesting point, wasn't it? Where the very sense that they're just dragging people into court, even if the outcome is favourable to the opposition, is staining enough on the memory that it should coerce a bit of better behaviour in the future.
Yeah. I think that's probably true. I think over the longer term, it's probably false. They probably do need to, I guess what I'm saying is you get thrown into court and for the person who's happened, the CEOs and senior management get thrown in there, and so they will drive a little bit slower for the next little while. Possibly though, some other people in cars.
You can zoom around them.
In other banks might use a chance to jump in the overtaking lane and zoom past because they're not going to be caught for
not in the spotlight.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I do take that point as I'm probably slightly less cynical, but still relatively cynical in terms of that. So I guess I'm not seeing a huge difference in terms of bank profitability on those fronts. And then the regulatory effects on some of the other sectors. Again, I think the financial planning is obviously I do think that's at the stage now where the FOFA laws came in and everyone was basically trying to get around them. Really, how can we keep everything going, keep the gravy train going?
Yep.
And it does seem as if that will change. I do think that's one that is sort of destined to come. I think in terms of the superannuation side, again, it seems to be that's more of a compliance issues, I think, and trustees and some separation. So I think there are some things that will happen at that front, but I don't think they're hugely affected on the profit side. And then mortgage brokers, it does seem very much that not much is going to change on that front.
Yeah,
So-
some reasonably polarising views there, but you can sort of get where he's coming from, I think, as well. And obviously, sitting there in front of in front of so many cases and hearing so many stories, he's got quite a well-formed opinion. And just finally, the odds on a new Royal Commission in the next seems to be, the odds are 5 to 10 years was quite interesting as well.
Yeah, that's right. In terms of, I think it's more the fact that we've seen significant pushback from, and I think a lot of whereas at the start it was like, oh yes, we're going to implement everything that's in this Royal Commission, that everything that the Commissioner says, and then it was, except for the mortgage brokering one. Oh, and that stuff will take a little bit longer to get out. And we'll consult with industry over these ones. And so I think there's a number of things that will be, I think a lot of the easy ones will get done.
Yep.
But I do think some of the harder ones and the more effective ones, and we've already seen on the HEM measure, we've got the Treasurer and the Prime Minister saying we need to get credit flowing to the economy.
That's right.
And we've got the second most geared economy in the world.
Saying chucking in another gear.
Yeah,
Let's go.
We need more money. We need more debt in there. So I do think that things that are pointing towards that will certainly be slowed and limited.
Okay, very good. Well, that's it for now, and thanks for watching. If you like what you heard today and you'd like to hear more, head over to nucleuswealth.com/subscribe. Give us your email address, and in return, we'll send you a weekly email with new webinar topics, links for our podcasts, and other news from Nucleus Wealth. I certainly hope you've got something out of today, as I have, and we'll look forward to catching you at the next one. Cheers.